So, welcome everyone, and we are excited to have you here for another edition of our coffee session. This is like number 34 or 300, one of the two.
Wow.
And we're here joined by the OG of the community who has been here since the inception. I'm just going to give him a little shout out. Jet, thank you for joining us. You know, we're also here with Vishnu, and we're going to talk a lot today about the idea of MLOps and what that means exactly from an organizational point of view and how we can build off of the frameworks of DevOps and where it holds up, where it does not hold up. But first, let's just start by giving Jet a round of applause, and I'll give a little bit of an intro. Jet, on the first ever meetup, you were there, man. And from then on, you've been there. You've been an integral part of this community, and I appreciate that. We've talked a bunch about MLOps. What does it mean? How do we see it? Why is it different than DevOps? Like that whole thing is huge. So maybe we should start there, and you can give us a bit of background on your thoughts and your take.
Yeah, cool. No, it was really good that encountering you at that start, because that was my start of my journey with machine learning. I'm quite new to machine learning, and it was kind of fun because the journey you were on, going through learning the subjects, it was like we were happening in parallel, right?
Yeah.
Every week you'd have this meetup that was bang on the topic that I was just uncovering as well, and so it was a lot of fun. And I've been obviously the conversation turns to tools a lot, and I've all been talking to you about how the real kung fu is in the culture, and now you've called me on that and made me talk about it, and it's not going to be easy, but it's a good topic.
No, I think that's a huge point, and that's probably going to be your quote slide that will make of you the real kung fu's in the culture of ML ops, and that is so important, and it's so easy. We were talking just before we hit record, right, about how it's easy to talk about tools, and it's easy to get caught up in tooling is the biggest piece of ML ops, but you have a different opinion of that.
Yeah. So I came to this from a DevOps perspective, and I'm really pleased to be here. I'm really pleased that DevOps is a big part of the AI challenge. All right. And actually, I think it's bigger than people think as well. I think it's the key strategic right now as well. It certainly is. And just been trying to reason my way through that. And I've been through technical leadership roles, and in the last couple of years, I wanted to go back to being a developer for a bit, get my hands on, right? And but then I've had to go back to the strategy and leadership in the end, so I started my journey with Kubeflow, and Kubeflow was brilliant. And it's interesting, we're talking about patterns a lot recently, and I think you mentioned it last week or recently, that the tools, one of the things the tools are good at is embodying the patterns, right? So somebody like me who's quite new to it, it's got a very opinionated way, and it's codifying all that knowledge that people have acquired, and then they're trying to commoditize that. And that's really, as we'll see, that's a lot of what we're doing. So this is why I kind of love Kubeflow a lot. And these arguments that you have with your more advanced engineers, then maybe for them, it's a different question. But for people like me, Kubeflow and David Aronchik videos, watching lots of those. He's love that guy. Yeah, really tells it how it is.
Yeah. You mentioned last night that MLOps is a way of life. It's a lifestyle. It's not just a tooling way of doing it. And I thought that was a great way of putting it.
Mm-hmm.
And so tell us about this, because I know as much detail as you want to get into, but tell us why you had to move over to the cultural side and where you feel things fail culturally when it comes to machine learning.
Okay, so if you study DevOps and continuous delivery, and I've got quite an orthodox view on it, and very much oriented around what people like Jez Humble talk about. And, you know, I shared some Jez Humble stuff with you early on that kind of illustrated that. And it really is all about lots of different cultural pieces with the technical practices sat in the middle. But what happens in reality is it gets constrained to the technical practices, and you know we could probably dig into why that happens, because that's a cultural thing. You know, in truth, you know, so one of the big questions we're going to talk about today is DevOps versus MLOps, and if we talk about that, it'll kind of unfold, I think. You know, are DevOps and MLOps the same thing?
Why don't we get straight into that? I mean, I'm curious to hear what you refer to as an orthodox perspective on DevOps and how that plays out in your perspective on MLOps.
Orthodox in as much as, you know, I kind of follow what Jez Humble invented the topic. He's really good. All right. I don't need to. Again, David Aronchik talked about last night how everybody's looking for novel solutions to stand out. All right. Well, somebody's already worked it out. You know, they've spent a long time working that out. That guy's really good. Right. There's no, you know, there's bits I can improve, but there's no need for me to invent my own version of DevOps to kind of stand out. All right. We just, so, but if, and so go on to the question, are they the same thing? Yes, they are the same thing. Discuss. I truly believe they're the same thing.
And so you think that they're the same thing. Why do you believe that this separate terminology has come about? And do you believe it's ultimately, you know, harmful for organizations to have this confusion, or do you think things should be simplified?
Well, they're both the same thing, like everything, depending on what level of altitude you look at it, isn't it? So
there we go. Devil's in the detail.
Yeah. So they're both about high performance software delivery, aren't they? You know, about throughput and stability. Okay.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all we're trying to do is get machine models out there delivering value, right, as quickly as possible. And so we actually start to forget about the outcomes that we're after, and we're talking about the outputs. You know, we're dealing with the artifacts associated with it, and forget that wider picture, right? And not staying focused on those outcomes. You know, we're trying to just get those things out and move fast. And I won't say move fast without falling over, but recognizing that you will fall over, right? There's an important cultural piece. A lot of organizations don't want failure, right? They don't want you to blow up. But, you know, think about Google's approach to commoditizing server hardware, all right? They embraced failure, and they said, right, failure is inevitable. So what we'll do is we'll have redundancy, you know, and that was it. It wasn't a grand engineering project. Well, it was in some way, but actually not in the way that people at that time thought about grand engineering projects. They were focused on mean time between failure, not mean time to restore.
So as far as there's this, basically, like you said, if you're depending on what level you're looking at it, it is very similar. But then as soon as you start to go down a layer, it starts to diverge. And one thing that we were mentioning that is so hard about machine learning is once you get data involved, the process of releasing a product becomes so much more complicated, and it's so much more difficult when you're dealing with the data and where that data comes from and how that data is interacting and where you're getting the data, right? So then I feel like as soon as you just go down and you're not looking at the big picture, you go down one level and they divert completely. Is that your thought too?
They you know, it's like the DevOps that people, DevOps is about 15 years old, isn't it? All right. And then that came along, and, you know, there was all kinds of complex unknown challenges at that time, and all kinds of complexities with doing this thing. Once it realized that, you know, if you can focus on making deployment trivial, then there's some good side effects of that. But yeah, there were still loads of challenges to solve. And yeah, you've got some challenges in here, but they're not the big ones. You know, I think the big ones here are data scientists are the people that create the value, the value generating parts of our stuff, okay? And for whatever reason, they do not care about infrastructure. But, you know, we go back to Scully and we find that there's a whole shit ton of infrastructure and stuff to deal with. And then, so how do we deal with that? And then who's going to deal with it? All those challenges are different. And, you know, what have we got available to us to deal with those things? And, you know, the world had a load of DevOps people and a load of software engineers around. And this is one of the things about it, isn't it? That we're bringing traditional software engineers into the picture, and they don't or didn't know at the time the differences. And over the last 5 years, they're starting to see those differences, and people are starting to see the patterns that are specific to machine learning. But then, yeah, you know, you've got all that data versioning, but they're, you know, they're, at some level, there's just technical solutions to those. But then also, like all that data stuff, all the data problems that I hear of is getting access to them, and it's this organizational. It's like, who, you know, once you've got access to that data, you know, but we, you know, that one's hard to deal with. And then there's, you know, your feature story kind of thing, which is, you know, once you've got all that data, how do you rationalize it and do it optimally? But then a lot of places are just, how do I get to the data, right? It could take 6 months. So,
yeah, I completely agree with that. That, you know, a lot of those challenges, they come from almost internal friction. A lot of times that internal friction across teams, across professionals is what causes the challenges that we then jargonize into MLOps, whatever it is. And I do like your focus on, it's really about high performance delivery of software. And you're completely right. And, you know, I wish sometimes technical leaders said that more often and said, we are here to do high performance delivery of software, right? Not necessarily this is the strategy for the month or whatever it is, you know?
Mm-hmm.
My question to you is, okay, you've been a technical leader, you've been in senior sort of technical management roles. It's 2021.
Mm-hmm.
You're seeing that people are saying MLOps is important. You know what you know now. How do you go about educating yourself and then figuring out how to articulate MLOps or whatever that constitutes in your organization? How did you do that? What did you learn from that? Just want to dive into how you do it as a leader.
I haven't succeeded at that yet, but I'm getting there. Okay, I've had to learn
process.
what it means. Yeah, it's a journey. Yeah, it's a
journey.
And, you know, DevOps is hard, and it's hard in, you know, not in heroic ways as well. All right, it's just hard in really mundane ways often.
Like what?
Like what? Just politics. You know. So, right. Let's think about this. You know, you guys talk to a lot of heavy hitters in the MLOps space. A lot of people who are having lots of success in MLOps. Okay, now the things that led them to success, they take for granted. They don't even notice. Right. But a lot of those are technology first companies, okay? And those cultures evolved oriented around technology, okay? So they're the right shape, right? So a lot of that inertia, that organizational inertia is not there, right? They've kind of, it's in their blood, right? But then there's a whole part of the world, like Airbus, for example. Airbus's culture evolved. I did a period of time at Airbus, and their culture evolved to build airplanes, right? And building airplanes is really different to building software. And now those kinds of companies who were one thing before, and that, you know, the culture is the behaviors that succeeded for them in the past. Okay, that's what made them successful. So those are going to be really hard to change. Okay, why should we change? Okay, and also they're the guys holding the money, and so there's companies that are oriented around the job of building software. Okay, that don't get in the way. And then there's companies that evolved in some other dimension, and then they're turning their hand to building software, but the way that they're structured makes it difficult. The way they're financed, for example, forces you to behave in a certain way, right? You know, if you have to, like as an architecture thing, you know, if in a company like Airbus, you're required to show an architecture for the whole system, okay? to get finance. You're supposed to declare everything that you're going to build, and then to get resources and all these things. All right. Well, how does that fit with the idea we're just going to iterate? We don't know where we're going, and so you end up with this very imperfect sort of barren ground upon which to grow. But all those companies you talk to, they have that stuff anyway, because it just happened to them. They're coming out of that.
Yeah, I understand it.
Completely empathize with what you're saying, Jet, particularly that point about, there are companies that are organized around different pillars, depending on the industry you're in, depending on the people you work with. And, definitely the companies that are organized around the modern software delivery.
Mm-hmm.
It is a lot easier to do the kinds of things that we talk about on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
I work at a medical device company, and it's harder for us to do some of these things because we have other constraints that are imposed by the industry, by regulation, whatever else that it might be. And I like one thing you said a lot, which is culture is the behaviors that led you to success in the past.
Yeah.
Right. And so on that point, then, as a manager, how do you articulate to the people that you work with, that you manage, that you lead, how to do things differently? What are some of your preferred tactics, that you would share with our listeners in terms of how to, kind of encourage some culture change that can benefit the implementation of MLOps?
Mm-hmm. I ain't no manager. I ain't no manager. Nah, managers are there to they're a business facing role to manage the dysfunction that happens, right? And they probably cause most of the dysfunction, and we could dig into that later, right? But what you need is leadership. Okay.
Nice.
Leadership.
Yes.
Is not managing, right? I don't want to deal with your bullshit. Okay. Leadership is orientation. Okay. I've finally got there with leadership. Okay. And leadership is a key part of DevOps. The components of DevOps. You want to sort of break it down into some of its components, right? Western culture. Western culture is Western was a guy who did investigations into safety outcomes in healthcare and in the air industry. And he found that the ones that had good safety outcomes had very what we call generative cultures, really good, what we'd call high trust good cultures. Then at the other end, then you've got bureaucratic organizations, and then you've got psychopathic organizations, right? So that's part of it. Lean product management, lean product development. So the idea that you've got the work coming to you is in small batches ready, right? Not here's a backlog of 400 items spec'd for the next 2 years. Okay, now iterate through that. And the problem with that is that we'll sit there for 2 years iterating through it, right, and not learning. Okay, we've already made the assumptions. We know what the future looks like, and I've failed in that way many times. In fact, every time. You're going to be pretty lucky if you succeed in that way. Okay, and then transformational leadership. Okay, and so DevOps is a business concern, not a technical concern. This is the big mistake people make, right? Has to start in the boardroom. Okay, quality in software has to start in the boardroom. If you go back to we talk about the Japanese Toyota. I think you referenced Toyota. Well, the guy who behind all that, Edward Deming, right? He these are quotes from him. Quality starts in the boardroom, and you don't put quality in by mass inspection. Quality is built in. And then there's the technical practices, test automation, deployment automation, all those things we know, right? But it's leadership is key. And
I love that point. Management is not leadership. You're completely right. It is a set of arcane practices designed on how to fight over resources in the particular confines of a business. It is not leadership. It is not leadership.
And I would say much of the architect role as well is that, it's given the name architect to make you feel better. It's a bit more prestigious. But
you're probably right. You're probably right.
It's managing business problems that are created by the business, like the one that we talked about earlier. I need to see what you're going to build for the next 2 years before I let you build it. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
That's what managers are for.
Yeah.
And so it seems to me like that idea is very easy to understand and take in if I were someone who were making these decisions or leading the company, and I was leading it like that, like, hey, let's see everything before we start building on it. I feel like that right now is easy to get rid of and try and change to a more agile approach, but that doesn't happen. Why do you feel that is? Why are people stuck in their ways on that?
Like we said, it's what made you successful before, and you know, like you let's say you come to some starting point as an organization, and you know, all those people in that organization have their own aspirations and things going on, right? You know, let's take it down to a project level. You know, there are people in a project who, you know, they've got their eye on their career, their succession through these things. Okay, they've been working on this project 2 years, and they've arrived at the point where, you know, they're going to lead it to glory, the next stage, and you know, they're going to choose the technologies and the architecture. And you know, little things like that can get in the way if they're not aligned with actually where you need to go, right? There's all kinds of things everywhere. There'd be dragons everywhere, right? You know, all kinds of things. And then, you know, the organizations, well, you know, you want to tell Airbus to change their shape. Like, I happen to make good friends with the PA to the head of finance, just accidentally, some social thing, and I was, yeah, I'm gonna change things around here, and she just laughed her head off, right? And he just laughed. You know, sometimes you can't, right?
Well,
you know, these guys at the bank, what are they going to do about all the compliance that they have to go through?
Yeah, and it's funny you say that on the project level and the people looking after their own. It reminds me of one of the talks we had with Flavio way back in the day, and he mentioned this. I don't know what you would even call it. This pattern that happens, or something that happens when you have people that would like to learn a new tool, and so they suggest it for the next project, and then it's called like resume driven development.
Okay. Yeah.
What a great point.
Oh, and how common is that, right? It's
absolutely.
Not just common, it's universal, right? And I'm interested in why that happens. I have a view on that. So with developers, and I've been that guy, right? We're not connected to the impact of what our work is, right? We are. I think there's a sort of tendency to view as an expensive thing, right? And so, you know, keep them working, right? They don't need to, you know, deal with that. And so they end up being disconnected in this kind of style where, give me a task, I'll do the task, right? But then where's the creativity? Where's the expression? Because, you know, developers are really bright people, okay? And, you know, obviously lots of us dysfunctional in other ways, but generally bright, creative people. And they're not allowed to kind of participate in the actual impact of the thing that we're doing. And so they've constrained to some kind of localized technical excellence, okay? And how do they stand out and express themselves, right? So it's, I'm going to choose the next architecture, okay? I'm going to, and then it gets centered around those kinds of things. And I think if you can connect developers up to the real impact of what they're doing, they'll be less worried about those outputs. You know, if you really connect them up with the outcomes, but they're isolated from those by managers and other intermediaries.
Well, and one thing that Flavio mentioned in that was how many times shit hits the fan when you have that happening, right? Because someone is trying to pick something up for the first time and then put it into production, and how dangerous that can be.
Yeah. So that's absolutely right. You know, so when, you know, let's say you're aspiring junior lead and you've come to a project, an aspiring architect, and you want to make a mark, right? You're not going to go for boring technology. You know, you're going to go for something cool, okay? And you know, you want to stand out and impress, but yeah, then you're going to hurt yourself, aren't you? Because you know, you've not done it before, okay? And those things then become challenging, and then the teams end up having to sit where, you know, so I've been an architect a long time, but the architect metaphor is dead. I hate the architect metaphor now, and so I don't use it. And the idea that somebody in advance can make good technical choices. It's been proven over and over again, and they're really hard to back out of. Yeah, one project I was on, we arrived in it, and there was one part of the architecture. It costs 2 million upfront license fee, £250,000 a year. I won't say which technology it was, but it was actually in the end, everybody hated it, and it was shifting 3 CSV files from here to here, right? So there was going to be a 4 million cost over the 3 years to do that, okay? And I said, well, okay, that's an architectural no-brainer, right? Yeah. Could we change it? No, we couldn't change it. Well, why not? Because we'll look silly. Well, why will we look silly? Because that was a centerpiece of our architecture when we sold this to the client, right? And now we're saying after spending £2 million, it was wrong. Yeah, so there you go. There's a good reason why organization is more powerful than architecture.
Well, that's a huge point too. Like that, going back to your comment at the beginning of the failing and being accepting of failing, and how that right there is not accepting.
Yeah, and that's where it all comes down to psychological safety. Look, those people that were saying no, there was really good reasons why they were saying no. That project had gone from, it was 12 months in, it was agreed to be 40 million euros. And they just realized it was going to be 80 million euros, right? Deloitte and Accenture were on the project and they were predatory, wanting to take it away from us. You know, there's all kinds of circumstances that, you know, if that project manager sitting you down in the kickoff workshop said, so what are the risks? You wouldn't have observed that. Yeah, the risk is that in 12 months' time, if you make this choice, it's going to be shit, and Deloitte and Accenture are going to be predatory, and, you know, you can't, all right? So the first thing is, know you're going to fail, right? And build your organization around failure. Lots of safe padding everywhere, and don't, you know, and everybody deludes themselves on, this is going to be great, this is going to be right. Optimize for failure, because it's going to be rubbish. Yeah.
That's a really nice principle of leadership. I really like that, organizing around failure. I mean, it's going to happen. We might as well try and anticipate that.
I know we talk about it a lot, but we don't do it well, do we? You know, everybody says, oh, we'll learn from failure, but don't. Okay.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah.
So one of the good principles of DevOps is to have a good incident management process. Okay, actually processed, right? So that's where a good bit process comes in, because you make it clear. I would argue even celebrate failure, but you know, it's hard to celebrate failure. But failure is absolutely where you learn. But when we do things, and again, you know, it depends where your orientation is. The traditional orientation is, no, we don't fail. Do not fail. But if you're building aircraft, then probably a good principle, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's recognize it's going to slow you down. But software is different materials, different properties, different stuff. Okay, and failure is a positive in that context, if you know how to use it.
Actually, that's a good point. You have to know how to use failure. You can't just say failure is okay. You have to know how to use it. You have to be humble and learn from it. Yeah. One of the things that I have learned that has been extremely helpful in thinking about, you know, how as an engineer to kind of self-organize and work through some of those managerial challenges is to really think about not just the product or whatever needs to happen, but to also really think about other engineers as consumers, right? To put them on par in the sense of being stakeholders in your work, not just saying, oh, I need what they need from a widget standpoint, but almost in a visceral sense, right? We need this cooperation to do anything. And my output needs to be their input in a way that enables their creativity. And so I need to really understand them. It's almost centering that other engineer in your outlook. And that's been one of my principles that's helped me kind of grow and be able to deliver software with a little more sanity than, you know, the traditional, the sort of rigid processes that can sometimes be put in place. What are some of your principles that have helped, you know, you kind of as a technical leader or just in general kind of communicate to developers, you know?
Right. Okay. So I've done this in different ways, right? So on that project we had, you know, so that was 2013, 14, right? It was early days of DevOps. Okay. It wasn't the universally accepted and well known. Okay. And that company, the companies we were working with all said, no, we have to have a long UAT, and UAT is like 2 weeks and all that, right? All that stuff getting in the way. But we had 8 of the, some of the best DevOps engineers sat there. So, but we weren't doing DevOps, okay? And then at Airbus, I was asked to be a consultant. So I'm play a consultant role and trying to articulate why DevOps is good and do lots of different exercises, all kinds of different activities to try and get that across. What I believe is the effective way is grassroots, okay? And this is actually proven as well. If you go to the State of DevOps reports, you see what the high performers do to do it. And it's communities of practice, it's grassroots. And so I don't want to be a leader sat in an ivory tower. I want to be sat in the development team. And in my job sitting in the development team in this last year, I've been lucky enough to do that. I've just shared my experience with a few people locally instead of trying to create some grand initiative across the company. Okay. And that's been really effective, I think. And those people are enjoying that journey. Right. But more recently, I've becoming more sort of technical strategist for the company, and it's going to have to become more, I don't know whether it'll be initiative driven, but localized experience, right? What we need more of is an apprentice model. All right. The stuff that we do is really hard and complex. Okay. And all the companies, right, they just want to hire in developers. Where was that story? There was one advertisement asking for 12 years experience of some technology, and it's only been around 6, right? And I remember I switched
incredible to see posts like that.
I switched over to Go like 4 or 5 years ago, okay? And, I'd been a good programmer for 12 years, whatever it was at the time. And, but I've, and Go was only picking up in 2014, thereabouts, right? But then, there's lots of companies that you want 3 years of Go, right? Well, I don't have that, but, I have a year of it and 12 years of other. So they're greedy. They don't invest in developing people. And I'd like to discuss this because I think this is one of the things we've got to do, right? One of the things that constrains us is having the people available to do it, okay? And when we look at data scientists, are these unicorns, aren't they, right? You talked about those people who are can do all of the things. And, you mentioned full stack guys. That's an interesting one. Where do you assume that the full stack is into the infrastructure? Well, actually, why isn't the full stack into the application? Okay, so that's what a full stack developer is. He's more in the application and the business rules, if you like. And so it might extend out that way rather than infrastructure. But growing people into the business, right? And this is why I think that topic of how do you chop it up into different disciplines is interesting. Not because I think the way it was expressed last week was that it's really complex, and so what we need to do is specialize. Okay, I think it is really complex, but the problem is the kinds of people we need to do what we're doing take 6 years to grow. Right? What we need is disciplines we can grow in 6 months or a year that are then become effective, and we can do that. So all those parts of a unicorn, if we can grow those in 6 months and a year, that's a strategic advantage. But then to say, actually what we're going to do is more people who've got deep experience of 6 years, and we'll just have them specialized in a narrow bit, I don't think that's the answer there. So
it sounds like you're going back to that point that we were talking about, our hypothesis around the unbundling of the ML engineer or whatever that might be. And I think that's great. I would love to talk about that more. I think where that came from for me is, as you pointed out just now, as some of these job posts irritatingly try to describe, you expect one person to do a lot. Right? It's a title like a machine learning engineer, or even a title like data scientist, right? We expect one person to do a lot. I think, even the way somewhat similar to the way software engineer used to be. And, that has to change. That has to change because of MLOps, right? You need to put more models in production. Those models need to be better, integrated in with the other components of the architecture and the applications, all those reasons, right? There's powerful incentives for that to change. And so what you're saying is that it's not so much about this class of professionals breaking out into a subset of other professions. It's about taking these skills and making them transferable and making them almost decomposing them and then allowing people to grow into them regardless of their professional experience.
Yeah. So the current thing is, you look to universities and like we've got loads of PhDs and, those people take a long time to grow. And the subject is complicated right now. Okay.
Yeah.
The subject itself, and it needs these kinds of people right now. Okay.
Right.
But where are we going with it? Right. Is it going to get more complicated or is it going to dumb down? Okay. And, it has to dumb down. All right. Over time, all this complexity, and this is why it's MLOps, right? We are removing the non-essential complexity from what we do so that we can focus on the essential complexity. All right. Now we need people to do that, and we can break that down into bits. Not that we need deeper and deeper people to manage more and more complexity, right? All these tool guys, and I've got to say the tools in this space are brilliant. And there's all those people rushing to make their bazillions on this next wave of stuff. And they are making the job easier and easier, and then how are we going to take advantage of that and scale up? How would we scale up, right? You can't just put more and more recruitment out there. So being able to scale up, what will the future look like? Will it be, a few big problems or lots of smaller mundane problems?
I see what you're saying. And, I hope this is a little bit abstract, but basically, even something like modeling, right? Building a machine learning model. Right now, there is essential complexity to it, and then there's non-essential complexity to it. And the way that we interview and the way that we look for professionals in MLOps to do the modeling component often emphasizes certain elements of non-essential complexity, right? It's, have you built a model from scratch? Have you experimented with XYZ architecture? That is still more common than the reality that a lot of model building is, hey, are my labels clean? Do we have the data? Where's the CSV? And
how do I get access to that?
How do I get access to, who do I ask? Those kinds of things. And on that point, actually, one thing I was thinking is I spend a lot of my day as a machine learning engineer thinking about annotation. And it is crazy. And I think many people in this role, especially in the medical industry, think about this a lot. Annotation, right? How do we get the labels that we need, the expert annotations? And it's crazy to me that in not a single machine learning class anywhere I've ever seen, is there a topic that discusses annotation. They don't talk about the tools. They don't talk about the math, about actually understanding where annotations might be noisy. It is completely absent. It's as if everything is presumed to be, the data is clean. So I see what you're saying, around you got to make things like modeling and stuff like that. You got to simplify it and allow people to get to competence and get to impact on those fronts sooner.
Yeah. And, even if you do split up all those roles, right, have you made things better? All right. A lot of the inertia comes from the handoff between disciplines or departments. Okay. So you split people up, that's not going to solve your problems. It's going to create more problems for you unless you're highly functioning. But, I still see a lot of, siloism, a lot of silos. And, the tools are going to simplify things, but again, that can backfire. David Ronchik last night saying, well, no, there's this simple thing. I can't remember what exactly he said. He's saying, if you introduce these tools, you can be introducing accidental complexity anyway. Okay. Yeah. So all the patterns and stuff, they're really good, right? So there's a bit of a thing for patterns now, right? And that's a really good thing. What's happened over the last few years is we've developed the patterns and the practices and the tools, and it's getting easier and easier all the time. Okay, so the job is going to be easier. Let's recognize that and think about how we can grow people into the industry from maybe non-traditional routes. And if we're going to get business advantage, that's one way to do it, right? But then, the patterns is kind of amusing. I see you people talking wistfully about the Gang of Four pattern book from the 90s. Yeah. But it wasn't that nice. It wasn't all that clean, right? There was a period of pattern mania, right? It was Patterntastic. And you
Patterntastic.
Coming back to, what you were saying about people, right now, instead of technologies, we have to fit into the next project. It's patterns we have to fit into the next project. I remember one
That's awesome.
little project that there was a developer trying to find where the configuration was in this piece of code. And he had been at it hours. He couldn't actually locate the configuration. It wasn't a big project either. And I sat down with him. I couldn't either. And what happened is this guy had just got the Gang of Four book and had just applied every pattern in this thing. And none of us knew what the hell was going on, right? We couldn't find anything. It was fucking nonsense. And so, don't get overexcited about all that. That's all. Look, the patterns are good, and the ones, but again, takes a bit of, it's not just a recipe to fill it full of patterns, fill it full of tools. It's all going to be cool. It's not. It's going to be horrible.
Yeah.
I have really enjoyed the direction that this conversation has been going around, just performance, delivery, the importance of that, the reality of politics in that process.
Yeah.
How leadership is different than some of the components of management, and because this is really important, because a lot of ML engineers are sitting in their organizations without a lot of clear executive support, but with an expectation. That's bad.
Yeah.
That's what leads to orphan models, great models with great performance, because we know how to do that, but we don't necessarily know how to make it applicable in the organization. And I think a lot of MLOps, I've actually been thinking a lot that lately, MLOps is a people problem. It's really a people problem, right? It's the people problem version of ML.
Absolutely. The whole thing is a people problem. This is where, I'm really enjoying it now. So microservices a few years ago became the new hotness, all right? And around the topic of microservices was the conversation about Conway's law. I think it was Sam McNeil put that in. You might have heard Conway's law spoken, and Conway's law says that the thing you'll produce will reflect the organizational communication structures, right? Now, I learned that several years ago. Learning it and really understanding it and seeing it. And so what you've just said is, it is absolutely, all right? And so this is where the whole thing comes in. It's the inverse of the problem, all right? So it's the environment that you create will produce that thing, not here's the thing you should produce, okay? Here's all the ingredients that I know that will result in that, the right people. And often we throw in what we produce with dispositional, okay, mostly. And so what we produce will be the inevitable result of our experience, knowledge. And so who you put in the room and the way you ask it, I've got some really terrible analogies, right? And I was trying to find some for this, right?
We love these.
If you go into a blacksmith shop and ask for a tree, what will you get?
A metal tree.
A metal tree, right? But it's a tree. Okay. But it might not have been what you wanted. Okay.
Yes. That's a great point. Love it. Yeah.
I was going to jump in real fast and just talk about the idea that we were mentioning before we hit record, and the idea of, because we were talking about Charlie Yu's video that we put out last week, and I know, Jet, you really enjoyed it, and you had some thoughts on whether or not machine learning is, or whether or not sprints are adequate for machine learning.
Right. Okay.
And that whole iterative process. And so can we jump into that a little bit?
Yeah. So an interesting connection with Charlie. We were in a pitch recently up against Workday. So it's interesting. He was from Workday. There's a connection there, yeah. So we do future of work stuff at Satalia too.
Nice.
And so, yes, agile. Is it good for machine learning? Well, when we say agile, shall we sort of clarify what we mean?
Probably,
do we mean
yeah.
that dance we do every week with a planning meeting, stand-ups and a retrospective and stuff? Yeah?
Yes.
It's rubbish. Okay. But it's also the least shit thing we've got. Okay. What the value of that thing is is everybody knows how to do that dance, right? It's a very poor dance. It doesn't have a lot of impact on making you actually agile. You know, you're doing agile there, aren't you, right?
Yeah.
But the thing of it is, you can plug people onto a project and everybody knows what that dance looks like, okay? So actually, if you're bringing together 10 people that don't know each other, there's one point of orientation that everybody knows how to do, all right? And that's as much as that is, all right? But then, you know, to get high functioning, you need to be like really agile, okay? Actually being agile, that's what you're looking for, isn't it? So that question of, is it applicable to machine learning? I would say right now, probably, yeah, because that's how we all know how to orient ourselves. What we've got to face up to is everybody in this business is new to it and quite junior. And so how do we work with that material? Okay. And so to, you know, put expectations on everybody that they're going to have deep knowledge of lean product management, for example. Okay, we're going to do this lean, right? Who the hell knows what that means, right? But everybody knows what Scrum looks like in the form that it's become. But no, it's a really commoditized version of Agile that wasn't intended. But it's okay. And same on a bigger scale, SAFe as well. So they were doing SAFe at Airbus. That was my view on SAFe. Well, it's a good playbook for a large organization to orient themselves around. Are they going to invent a whole new scheme? You know, to invent those cultures that produce in that way takes years. Okay, so you may as well just get one off the shelf and try and do it. But is it the, you know, massively impactful thing? No, right? What Agile is several mates sat around a table who know each other intimately well, focused on a problem for the customer, having conversations with each other and just getting stuff done constantly in small amounts. That's exactly where it came from all those smart people that we know that formed the Agile Manifesto, right? They worked in that way. And you know, we've moaned about Jira, right? I don't like Jira because it becomes a proxy for communication, okay?
Yes.
Yes? And so
Yes.
And so we think we've communicated, but we haven't. Okay. And software development is it's a social activity you do with your friends, right? So you've got to become really good friends with the people you work with. And like, you know, if you're going on an adventure with your mates, you don't, oh, it's on Jira. What do we do here? Right. Oh, it's on Jira. No, you just talk to each other, right? Just talking to each other all the time. Okay. And this is where the cross-functional teams thing comes in, because you're forming little groups like that. Okay.
That is so true. I think, and you know, Bill Gates had a quote, which is, you know, he had a sort of concept where he said, you know, the best software developers aren't sitting in the room coding. The best software developer is the one who's in his colleague's office drawing on the whiteboard, right? That's the best software developer. That's the person that's actually delivering.
Yeah.
I think that ethos is what we have to bring to ML through MLOps, right? It's that ethos around communication. And I think it's also the fact that it's exactly what you said, which is we are all junior in this field.
Mm-hmm.
There is nobody who's been doing it for 25 years because it hasn't been around that long.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the more that every professional accepts that, embodies that, and realizes that everything else, it's just scaffolding to get to that point a little bit quicker, you know, agile, it's scaffolding, you know, it's not a way of life. It's just a little something that can get you to that place of delivering high performance software a little bit faster if you adopt it the right way and not let it be an obstacle in its own way. That ethos is what we kind of have to distill through MLOps, through what this almost movement is, right? And the journey, as we started talking about, as we started at the top, the journey, the whole process.
To that point on the junior, and we're all junior, I think that's why the MLOps community has such a good vibe, and we're all very humble, is because none of us are coming into it saying like, oh, I'm the shit, you know?
Yeah.
We've all been, as somebody put in the Slack the other day, like, it's obvious when we talk about our stuff, we're licking our wounds still when we're talking about what we do and how we do it. And it's very much like that. You don't have these years and years of like, oh, well, there's the rock star, or I've done this so many times, I can do it with my eyes closed or in my sleep. Like none of that. So it brings a humility to the whole ecosystem. And that's something really nice that is another cultural part for us as a whole in the MLOps community. So, all right,
Absolutely.
Jet.
And,
Yeah,
you
you
know,
got any last words?
Yeah.
Throw it in there.
So you, right? You know, you're in that category of things that DevOps needs, right? You're in the leadership category, right? You're now unwittingly and accidentally one of the leaders of the MLOps community. And I would argue you've had more impact on actual code out there and good outcomes than any single engineer, right? You know, think about all the people that have heard the orientation, the connections that you've created, all those things. Okay. So, you know, and yeah, and the culture that you've created around it, why is yours successful? Right. You know, the culture and the leadership of you, and, you know, and that kind of unpretentious, you happen to be the right person for that. The chap you had on from Salesforce, you know, really humble chap, right? These people that you've had on, the people that are successful, they're not strident assholes. These are all really good, kind of pragmatic people. But yeah, there you go. You're doing MLOps and DevOps, Demetrios, now.
I'm doing it.
There you go.
The evangelist that we need. That's who
Yeah.
Demetrios is, yeah.
That's so funny, man. I never thought about me affecting code by doing these coffee sessions or these chats, but now that you say that, I totally can see it. I hope.
Think about it.
If there's anybody out there that has changed their code or has done something differently, please tell us in the comments, because that gives me goosebumps.
So the question is, how many lines of code has Dimitri produced in the last year? We can get that number.
We're going to quantify it and we're going to publish it.
Yeah. And then next year it's going to be more. I got to keep with my growth and make sure I get that hockey stick going.
Growth at all costs.
Oh man, well, this has been great, Jet and Vishnu. I really appreciate you guys, your views on things, and just this deep dive into culture, I think, is needed, because it's so easy to get wrapped up in the technical side, and it's so easy to just focus on tooling or what's the new shiny thing. And the cultural aspect, like, this is almost, I view this as going back to the basics. Like, hey, don't forget about this piece, right? Like, this is why we call it MLOps. It's not why it would be called something else if we didn't have this piece. So that is the basics, like the foundation. We need to make sure that we nurture that foundation and keep it going strong in the MLOps world and as we move forward.
Yeah, I think this chat has been awesome. Just from, you know, it's spoken to. A lot of times we talk about what MLOps is and what it constitutes, what tools to use, what to do. And what's equally important, and where leadership comes in and culture, is how you do it, right? And you know, that's equally, if not more important, how you do it in the context of the organization and the place that you're in. And that's what this discussion really brought out. I can't thank you enough, Jet, for your passion and for the comments and everything that you shared with us. And I really hope that the listeners, you know, send us a couple of emails telling us some of the stories that resonated with you know, that you and I exchanged. So thank you so much for your time.
And Jet is on Slack, so if anyone wants to continue the conversations about this, hit him up on the community Slack. He is there, and we'll be seeing you later, man. Thanks for the coffee session.
See you soon. Bye.